Okay, so I'm going to work through a modeling exercise to talk through some techniques about model making. For this exercise, I have located a moment in the Asala campus, which is materially interesting. I picked this ramp adjacent to the library where an accessibility ramp has been put in. And what I think is interesting about this from a material standpoint is that it becomes this connective piece between the Maltings and Minto House, but as an architectural intervention, it sits just off of the masonry wall. So we have the old stone wall of Minto House, and then this new piece, which just kind of floats in front of it. And so we have some plasterboard, and we have within that plasterboard, the depth of the handrail is kind of built into it, is this sweet little detail where we can very clearly see the kind of timber elements coming together. We can see the plasterboard kind of floating up to it. And then it turns the corner and has this nice little pocket door, which is concealed within, ideally you think it would have been within the full depth of that, but it kind of pops out a little bit. But so it's a nice moment. It has this nice timber edge. There's some windows back along at the back corner. One light to get into the library and one light that looks out into Chambers Street. So a series of nice kind of things going on. So I've printed out some reference photographs just so I can look back and see, kind of what's going on, get proportions correct. Obviously, you guys are going to want to start with an actual survey. You've been doing so much survey work and drawing techniques and things like this. So the beginning stage, and I've kind of started to do this on this sheet, is to draft out onto your cutting material what you're going to be cutting. So you basically draw your survey onto your cutting material. And that's the first step. So I've kind of done that. I've just loosely proportioned it rather than kind of fully measured it just for the sake of speed. But you guys should take your time and actually measure it. And I've picked a kind of a white, was kind of a creamy card, but something white to represent the plasterboard and some gray card, which will represent the timber. And then ultimately it would be really nice to have like a cast plaster element to do the stone wall. But I'm going to leave that for you guys to do the casting stuff. And I will just focus on card modeling for the moment. So as I talked about in the tools of model making tutorial, you want to start with a nice sharp blade, nice 10A blade on your scalpel, and just kind of, insert the blade to get that first line so you know what you're butting up your ruler against, and start cutting. So your first stroke is to just kind of puncture the surface. You're not trying to get through the card in a single pass. It's going to take multiple passes, and you can feel when you get through. You can feel there's a textural change that happens as you break the surface. Now, the reason why you want to take your time and go slow is so you get a nice even cut along that edge, right? If you try and push really hard into it, then you're fighting against the material and you're never going to end up with a clean cut. You can get away with a single cut on thick paper. You can get away with a single cut even on some very light gauge gray card, but this is what's called museum board, and it's a denser core. So that means I have to take more passes. So you'll see as I get to the gray card, it's going to cut a bit smoother. Now, when you're cutting, you want to take your time. You want to make sure your blade is straight up and down to the cutting surface so that you're not getting an angle on your cut. And what that means is that when you come to making right angles, it's going to be a lot easier to get a precise join. Now you can see as I'm coming up to a previously cut line, I'm running long of the line here, right? And what that gives me is a really crisp corner in there. I feel that it's not quite gone through. There we go. right? So I got a nice, clean, level cut all the way around. Now we have a ramp that goes up here. So I've taken a bit of a ramp out. So we're just gonna cut that ramp section. My recommendation for model making is to get a nice soundtrack or something, listen to a podcast, something that requires, well, maybe podcasts are not so good because they kind of require your brain, but some nice music, just because it's an activity that it doesn't require a huge amount of thinking, but it does require focus time. So you can't really be watching something. You can talk to your friends, obviously, or you can listen to music. All right, so what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna cut the line for where the handrail runs, and I'm gonna use that, and I'm just gonna separate it out. You could obviously cut double thickness, like cut the thickness of that piece out from it, but I've kind of accommodated for the height of it in that, because as soon as I cut that, I can just shift it off and accommodate the line behind. Now I've already pre-cut some gray card. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mark that out on the drawn handrail line, because it's obviously going to be at an angle. So if I make it as a straight extrusion, if I make this piece as a straight extrusion, it's not going to work with the angle. So if I line it up on that line of the handrail, I can mark out where I need to cut. And that will give me the exact angle of the handrail. You can see as I'm cutting, I use my fingers to hold the material so it doesn't slide around. If the material starts sliding around, so you push hard on the ruler, and that's going to prevent your base from sliding. So now I've got these two pieces, which are going to be the top and bottom rail. Again, you can see on the image of the handrail, it's a composite of 4 elements. You have the back piece, you have the front piece of ply, which is fixed to that. You can see this by the grain of the ply. And then the kind of the bottom piece, which catches the handrail. So 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So now I'm going to make the bottom rail. And there we go. And this is going to be the actual handrail element. And for this one, I probably can just get away with not using a ruler, but just using the piece I've already cut. And now I'm gonna do my first glue. So again, I use PVA. Elmer's is an awesome alternative to the Fast Tack stuff. The Fast Tack stuff is like the Lexus of PVAs. It's a beautiful glue, but I'm out of it at the minute, and it's a bit more expensive. The Elmer's stuff you can get at Ryman's, and it's cheap. I would definitely get PVAs that have a twisty top, because they allow you to control the flow. So you can see I've just put a tiny bead of glue on, and then I've wiped the excess off with my finger. And then that is going to just go right on that edge. And because I've wiped it off, it already has tackiness. And so I can just leave it. I don't have to really prop it up. And then just get like a scrap piece of card and wipe the excess glue off your finger. So now I've got what is going to be the bottom rail and the handrail element. It's kind of popping up a teeny bit. So you put a little bit of pressure on just to make sure that adheres nicely and consistently along. The gray card is kind of warping just the teeniest bit. So I'll just hold that for a second. And then I'm going to glue the face of this. Oh, it's trying to pull away. So holding your glued joints is, again, something that you don't want to rush. I'm kind of rushing this a bit too much just to try and keep the video short, but make sure you hold your joints until they are dry, and don't mess around with checking them constantly. Every time you kind of check them or move your fingers around, you're giving yourself, or you're increasing the likelihood of getting messy, getting your model messy. So just have patience and wait, and you're going to end up with a much cleaner model. Make sure that is aligned just at the bottom. Whoop. And there we go. If you can see, that's the kind of bottom of the handrail. So now I just need to make the top piece. I can probably just reuse that glue that I've wiped. So you can see I'm using the glue incredibly sparingly. A very common mistake with model making is to use too much glue. You really only need a tiny bit to do the job. And the more glue that you have, the messier it becomes. The messier it becomes, the harder it is to do. Again, it's just about taking your time. Cool. So I'm going to set that aside and let that dry for a little bit while I cut now. Oopsies. While I cut the wall down. Cool. Get your caffeine beverage of choice. Okay. Again, you want to fight with the material as little as possible. You really, really, really want it to, you want the knife, the weight of the knife to do as much of the cutting as possible. Personally, I find it much easier to stand up when I'm model making. If you're sitting down, your body's all tight and it can be difficult to get. You want you want your elbow to be quite free to be able to make those pulls. So I would just, yeah, I'd recommend standing up. Not all the time, but you know, sometimes. Okay, so we have our little box for the handrail, which is kind of pulling away, again, because I'm kind of rushing a bit. Maybe I'll just set that aside and make the other element. Let that dry for just a second more. Okay, so now this one's gonna be straight because that angle, that part of the handrail is angled. This part of the handrail is straight. So I can use the right angle from the other side. So you can see how much easier that gray card cuts. You can get white card that's not, this is just what I had lying around. This is a much more kind of premium material. Basically, it's a solid core. It's non-acid archival core. So oftentimes with kind of white card, what you'll see is a white face and then a more yellowed inside and then another white face on the back. That yellowed inside has acid in it. And so it's not good from a conservation standpoint. It's a lot cheaper though, but this is just stuff that I had, so that's why I'm using it. All right, so now we need to make the top and bottom rail. I really advocate always using the cuts that you've made as a shortcut. So once you've made, there's no point really in measuring these two pieces out or measuring that piece even. Measure it from the model because the model is the true dimension, right? Once you've made the cut, I mean, there are always, you can draft, even when you draft it out, there's always going to be a small degree of variance from what the kind of technical drawing would be and what the model is. And so if you're measuring from your model rather than measuring from your drawings, you're going to be able to get a tighter fit, which is actually kind of a point of working with existing buildings too, because you've got, there's no such thing as a right angle in a building. There are always sort of approximations of a right angle. And so there you go, an embedded lesson about retrofit. And what I mean by that is that, architects draw a plan of a building, oops, and they draw it, oh dear God, they draw it as a series of right angles, but materials don't come usually in right angles, or they've been damaged a teeny bit, or they go in, 0.5 of a degree off. And so when you come to the corner, it's suddenly not 90 degrees, it's 89.5 degrees or something. And those kinds of things just compound. And then when you talk about working with an existing, and that's in a new build situation. If you're talking about existing buildings, over time, things move, materials shift, timber settles, etc. And so they become really challenging to work with because you're constantly, having to go back and kind of reference against the existing building to make sure that things fit properly. Okay, this is a little bit messy, but it'll dry clear, so it's no big deal. And this one should hopefully be pretty dry by now. Yeah, that one's getting pretty good. So what we can do now is we're going to basically glue this in the inset of that wall buildup, right? So again, this is just a plasterboard sheet. Plasterboard sheet is about 12 mil. So my thicknesses are, not going to be totally accurate, but they're kind of good enough for this exercise. We're having a little bit of a glue explosion. So that's going to go like that. So what I'm going to do is glue along that edge. And then flip that upside down because we're looking at the back side of the wall now. And now part of this exercise is about guessing what things are made of. You can make informed guesses. Some of you are going to have different levels of knowledge and experience of what a building is made of. Some of you guys may have, built forts or tree houses when you were kids. And so you might have a better idea of, what it takes to kind of put something together and build it. But plasterboard, the plasterboard doesn't float, right? It's attached to something. So behind this wall is a timber stud wall, which the plasterboard is mounted to. So now on this back side, we need to make that wall. So I've pre-cut some elements, which we're going to say are timber joists. So I'm going to start measuring out and putting some of these in to build that back structure of what this wall is. Now, again, you might not know what the wall's actually made of. What this exercise is asking you to do is make your best guess. Do a bit of investigation, knock on things, right? If you knock and it sounds hollow, it means it's probably a timber wall, stud wall. If you knock and it sounds solid, it's probably a masonry wall. Maybe it's brick, maybe it's stone. But you can make an informed guess based upon your investigation. So this one, for this end, we're gonna set in just a teeny bit, because as we can see on the photograph, there's a timber return. So that will just give us a little bit of space to work that detail out. Also, what that gap's going to do, it's going to reinforce this idea that the wall is, that the plasterboard is floating, right? Which is kind of a part of the material narrative of this, if you will. The story that we're telling about the material relationships. That's what I mean by material narrative. Generally speaking, I would say on models, if you're not going to see it, it doesn't matter how messy it is. So given that this, in a like traditional model, we're building sort of the backside, the unseen. And in that case, you could be sort of as messy as you want it to be. Now, in this case, and because of what we're doing with this exercise, this is very much what you want to see. And what that means is you have to be as careful about this backside as you are about the front side. So we have to build it deliberately so that we can use it to talk about the materials of the moment that we're interested in. And if it's messy, then all people are looking at and all people are thinking about is how messy it is. And if you're trying to make elegant architecture, everything about how you communicate that thing needs to be elegant. Okay, so now we're going to stud this out. On a wall like this, you probably have timbers at 600 centers. So that means every 600 centimeters, every 600 millimeters, there would be a timber. Again, I haven't kind of measured this accurately, even though I expect you guys to. So I'm just going to do it by eye. Okay, now what this is going to do is going to allow us to talk through the timber stud construction on the back of that plasterboard wall. It's also, from a modeling standpoint, going to give us the prop to catch that timber edge, that beading that runs along. So that timber sits a little bit longer, so I'm going to need a longer element than the ones that I was working with previously. All right, so I stopped the video for a little bit just so I could continue, given that I'd already kind of presented the techniques to you guys for what I've done. I want to talk through a little bit now what I've got. So after I built this wall and put on the timber top, which we can see as that kind of edge, I fixed on the ramp. So the ramp, again, changes materials. Now that ramp was built up, right? Because it's creating a slope. So it's coming off of something, which means it's probably a suspended timber floor. So I stopped the deck short to reveal those timber studs coming through. How you can tell if how a floor construction is built, or at least how you can guess. In the same way with knocking, if you knock on this wall, it's gonna sound hollow. If you knock on that wall, it's gonna sound solid. If you stomp on a floor, you can guess about what its construction is. So if you hear a ringing or like a hollow sound, it's probably a suspended timber floor. If it feels solid, it's probably concrete or stone, something like this. So I wanted to build the deck for the ramp because I wanted to give the model a base to sit on, but also because I wanted to show what was happening and reveal that structure. So we get a sense that this little piece, this little architectural piece, is something which just slides into a condition of an existing building. So for you guys, the next step would be to make a plaster piece which ran along this edge to represent that stone wall here, and then came underneath. So essentially a plaster L, which held that, right? Because it's a suspended timber floor, which is built on top of stone, and then wrap up the back, right? And so then what that would be is this little piece that's slotted in. Now I've turned the corner here of the plaster, again, as we can see in the photo, to get a sense that this is a wrapping, right? Plaster is maybe like 3 mil to 10 mil thick. Plaster board's 12 mil. So this will be plaster, or plaster board maybe, but it wraps that corner in either case. So essentially if we have that plaster cast piece here, we get a sense of the skimming of this as plaster board, which then turns into plaster. Maybe it's plasterboard still. But in either case, we see that this is an architectural piece that just slides in and is held by the masonry of the existing building. And then I folded the corner here just to show that kind of containment of, the kind of sense of a journey that we're kind of coming up to something, but then just stopped it short to reveal again from this view that what we have is a construction, an assembly of things, right? If I had chosen to carry that all the way around, then it just feels like it's an enclosed space, but I'm beginning to reveal some of this construction on the inside as well. So I can talk through the model, we can turn the model around, and we can talk about its kind of construction sequence. I put in a couple noggins down here to prevent these pieces from flexing, but it also is, it would be done in kind of, real life as well. But so now I have a piece. It took me about an hour to make, all told. Yeah, so, it's, you guys, again, will have, you'll have another material to bring into it. So we want a cast piece to be a part of this model. I could put in some acrylic if I were going to model in these upper windows, which would be another kind of nice feature to add into it. Yeah, that's kind of it. So now I will take some photographs of it, and I will show you guys the photographic setup as well. But that is the beginnings of some model tutorial. Okay, so I have just very temporarily set up just a piece of paper which folds. Obviously, it's light outside right now, and I'm photographing this against a window because it's the open area that I have. So this is not ideal. But the infinity paper, and then we have just like an Anglepoise lamp, so we can control. So basically now, what I can create with the white background is I can adjust this light till I get, something like this is quite nice, right? Because it begins to show the shadow along the back edge, which reveals some of the depth. So I can get some nice kind of elevational photographs. Maybe we want that to be, inside here, cast that shadow. But I could take essentially a series of photographs against that white background, that's going to make it really easy to adjust, to format for the portfolio, because I don't have any background noise or whatever. Set it up sort of axonometrically, get some photographs like this maybe, spin it to the back, get a kind of reciprocal angle over here. Again, kind of manipulating the light in order to get that kind of nice shadow relationship. Maybe get a couple of the underside as well. And you can see how, as a model now, already we're kind of getting into an architectural character, right? This thing is something which begins to describe kind of containment. It's doing a lot of things that that a piece of architecture kind of does. So yes, but point here being photograph carefully. So I've taken some photographs and I sent them to my computer. So I want to very quickly show you some quick editing in Photoshop to try and make these look better. I go through this in some of the other tutorials, but I just wanted to add a bit on here to kind of complete the package. So first off, we obviously want to rotate this. So image rotation, 90 degrees counterclockwise. And we don't really, the colors aren't important here. What's important is the tonal differences and the materiality. So I'm going to desaturate it. You can desaturate a couple different ways. If we click on the adjustments, we can go to hue saturation and drop the saturation all the way down. That's looking pretty good. Now I might want to add another adjustment layer and say brightness contrast and up contrast a little bit, maybe up that brightness just a little bit as well. Now the image is not really centered, or there's a lot of kind of white space around it, which is kind of unnecessary, so I can crop it down. The crop tool is C for crop, or it's over here in the palette. All right, so something like, we want a little bit of white space around it to allow it to float, but using those guides, you can say that's like, approximately middle. And so now we have, a pretty nice photograph of it. Now we could start to make some interesting collages with this if we start to bring some of the other images in. So let's open up make a new file. So just Command N for new. Let's make an A3. Let's actually make it landscape, create. And now if I merge these together to make it a flat, because if I try and bring this in right now, it would bring it in separate layers. So I'm going to Command E to flatten that down and then drag that image over into this side. Another way of doing that, oh God, what have I just done? I'll delete that and just bring all the photos in to show you how we can edit them as one together. So bring in this one and rotate it around, bring it down maybe a little bit, and then grab, let's see, that's the bottom piece. Let's see if I have a better picture of the bottom. That's the back side, so probably want that one too. I'm going to scale that first. So let's rotate that around until it is approximately the same size. We can fix the size later. Now that back wall, rotate that around, shrink that size down as well. Now what I can do is I can move this one sort of on top of that one, change the blend mode to a multiply, and then I can scale it so it's the same size. If you hold Alt while you're scaling, it centers from the middle, so that's about right. Change that blend mode back to normal, pull that one to the side. So we've got the sort of, left elevation, as it were, the right elevation, as it were, the kind of underside plan. Let's change that one again to multiply. We could do that same technique of multiply. The other thing to do is to create rulers. So let's click on that layer, drag it to the top because it's sort of our key image, and drag out some rulers from the side. That'll give us the overall width. Obviously we're in perspective, so it's not truly a plan, but we can scale that, and that's about right. Now, what other shots do we have that we might want to bring into this? Do we want that one in? It's a bit wonky. I think we probably won't do that one because it's not the best shot. That one's all right. That might be interesting. Let's see if we have a better one of that. Let's bring that one in. So we have that elevation. Which side is it? It's like that. And scale it down. So it's going to be a little bit bigger. So that's going to be our kind of middle one looking in, and then we're going to have the two elevations to either side. So let's drag that over there. We can get rid of those guides by just dragging them off to the side. And so now what we need to do is we need to start to crop down some of these images to make them all feel like they're a part of the same world. So first off, we want to again take that hue saturation, drop the saturation all the way down, brightness contrast, and bump the contrast up a little bit, bump the brightness up a little bit. So basically when you make adjustment layers, if they are on top of the stack, they affect the entire stack. If we were to move these lower down in our stack of layers, it just manipulates the image that is underneath it, right? So we want these to be on the top. So let's take this one, and we now need to rasterize all of these. Basically, when you drag a photograph directly into Photoshop and you see that little icon on the bottom, it's a smart object. What a smart object means is you can scale it up or scale it down, but it's still referencing the original image. So if you scale something down and then decide to scale it up again later, you're not losing resolution. Whereas the minute that you rasterize it, it sets it at that size. And now if we were to scale it up, we would lose resolution. So just something to kind of keep in mind. All right, so we can kind of crop down that much of it. So I'm using the marquee tool right now, which is up here. M is the shortcut for marquee tool, and then I can just delete that with the delete option. Select maybe that much of it, delete that. Select some of the top, delete that. Select some of that side and delete that. I want to kind of keep some of that nice shadow in there. Okay, so now let's select on that. So it's just it's a double click on that, and it allows us to select that layer. So we'll move that one up here, get our guide down. The guide should snap automatically to it. Now we haven't scaled this piece yet, so it actually looks about right though. So let's just kind of leave that one there. That's pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. All right, so drag another guide down to the bottom of this. Now it's not going to snap to the bottom of that because I'm not on the layer. So if I press V to get back to the selection tool, double click, go to that image and bring the guide up, it's going to snap to it. So now what that means is when I use the marquee tool, I can snap to that guide to delete it. But I haven't rasterized yet, so I need to double click on that, scroll down to rasterize, then I can delete it. Now yeah, we're still on it. Select that top bit, delete. Come over to this other side elevation. I want this one now to sit up on top of our elevation. So probably about there. That's pretty good. Delete out up to it, so we have some of the shadow. Need to rasterize that one. I should have rasterized them all as a batch, but I didn't. And then let's select that, delete that. So our page is a little bit too tight, so we have one of two options. We could either scale these all down a little bit, but I'm going to instead adjust the paper size, which is Command Option C, which allows you to adjust the canvas, or you can go up to here and say Image Canvas Size. And then I just need to extend it from the left to give myself more real estate on the right. And I'm going to change that to say 5,500 pixels. And that should give me enough to drag this image over. And now we have the right elevation, the left elevation, and that middle perspective looking up. And we have the undercarriage, which we can tuck. Let's just come back to this one and put some of those guides in. Put that guy in the middle, so it's about right. And then we need to rasterize that one too. Rasterize layer. can delete off. Now I'm doing this in a really messy way, but I'm just kind of it's gonna, you know, it's gonna do the basic job, which is just to show you guys that from some, you know, just a couple quick photographs, and we have a couple quick photographs, and we have the beginnings of, so now press Command H to hide that, hide the guides, and there you have some nice, clean, clear, drag those down. I can see that I haven't deleted out those pieces because they're off the canvas, so quickly delete those. And we have a nice page for the portfolio, right? It's, you know, we could play with this a lot. We could combine this with elevational drawings. We could combine this with photographs of site. We could, you know, pull these things apart to give them a bit more space. Maybe this one actually wants to live underneath that as if it's this kind of mirrored image. That's quite sweet. But that means I need to adjust the other pieces accordingly, etc. So compositionally, there's a lot of room to kind of play with what you've got here. We could, you know, maybe that guy sits up on top over there, and then these three, which one is that one? These three slide over, and then we would need to, let's see here. So we're setting, because those are a bit bigger, we could say we're setting a bit, oops, we could say we're setting a bit of hierarchy. What's going on here? Select into that one, drag a ruler on, take this one and delete that out. Take this existing ruler and slide it onto that edge. This one actually wants to then bump over a bit more, doesn't it? Because of the shadow. Well, no, because then it's not centered on there. I mean, you can see this is a game of playing once you get into the compositional stuff. But the point is, you can play a lot and have a lot of fun with compositionally what you do and the story that you're telling. So, you know, what looks good and what doesn't look good, it involves playing. It involves testing stuff out and seeing, you know, maybe this wants to be weighted down in the kind of corner of a sheet more, and then wants to have some nice annotation here. Right, something. So yeah, just a quick little thing to say, basically, once you take your photographs, you're not done. Photographs need to be formatted and take your time in terms of the kind of documentation, right? So if you photograph this on a messy studio desk, it's going to have a lot less kind of weight than if you start to take your time a little bit and make something nice. So play around with this, have fun, and we look forward to seeing the results.